Okay, so then let's move to the next speaker. It's we make a big jump, of course. On the other hand, we also talk here about a life and death technology, although at first sight it's not the case. So we will talk and we will hear about aerosols and the big change the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen has done as soon as it became clear that there's a pandemic coming, and and to see that an entire institute is changing direction. And you may also all have seen in the newspapers and also in the policy changes of the governments the impact of some of the research we're going to hear about now. So Mohsen, thanks for joining, and then so I hand over to you to give your talk.
Thank you, Martin. So let me first share my presentation. Yes, so it was a very interesting talk from the previous speaker, and then I would also like to thank Martin and the organizer for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to present our work. I'm currently in Netherlands in another conference, and shortly after this presentation, I have to check out from my room and attend the other meetings. So I apologize that I cannot listen into the remaining talks, but I guess these things will be recorded and we might have access to some of the presentations later. So today I'm going to talk about the measurements we did on the respiratory particles in the Max Planck Institute for Dynamics and Self-Organization in Göttingen. And we have also carried out assessment of the infection risk in one-to-one exposure scenarios. So I don't think I need to have so much motivation explanation for why we want to investigate COVID-19 and infection risk, as all of our personal lives or business life has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I go ahead and I directly ask the question we asked ourselves in the beginning of the pandemic, and that is, what is needed for assessing risk of infection for airborne diseases? Well, there are many factors you need to know if you want to assess the risk of infections. I'm going to summarize some of the most important ones here. The first thing you need to know is the infectious source, and the infectious person you want to know when the infectious person is talking or breathing or in many different activities that they might have, what sort of particles and concentration of particles they are producing. You need to know from them the exhalation rate, the viral load, and if they are masks, what is the total outward leakage from their masks. And you need to also to know from the medium or the ambient between the infectious and the susceptible, what kind of airflow you have. Do you have any particle deposition from the infectious to the susceptible before reaching the susceptible? What kind of dilution in the particles you have? Would the particles shrink from the infectious to the susceptible in size? Do you have inactivation of the pathogens or not? You would also need to know on the susceptible side, what is their inhalation rate? What is the intake efficiency? What is the deposition efficiency of the particles that they inhale in their respiratory tract? And if they are masks, what is the total inward leakage? And when they absorb some pathogen, what is the dose response model in order to be able to calculate the infection risk? So let's see, what do we know about particle number size distribution from people during respiratory activities, such as speaking, breathing, talking loudly, and so on. This is a table from a review paper we are doing with our colleagues at the MPI Chemistry in Mainz. And in this table, we have listed some of the most important works in the field who has measured the size and concentration of the respiratory particles. It starts from the pioneering work of Duguid in 1946, all the way to some of the works that we had during the COVID-19 pandemic recently up to 2021. And these works have provided a lot of insight on the size and concentration of the particles and the mechanisms that producing respiratory particles. They have also provided insight on the possible routes of airborne transmission. However, there are still some room for improvement. For example, some of these investigations do not provide enough information for others to be able to reliably determine the particle size distribution. Some have carried their measurements under uncontrolled conditions, the most important one being the relative humidity during the measurement. Some have measured a very narrow range of particle sizes from the human subjects. Some have no direct concentration measurements at all. Some use flow instruments. Some had less than 10 subjects during their experiments. Some investigated only one activity. And to best of our knowledge, none of them has measured directly the concentration of respiratory particles that are greater than 20 micrometer, and the data from children and adolescents are very limited. So that's why we decided to do measurements ourselves. You can see here a photo from our clean room at the MPIDS. We have measured more than 130 subjects and in a strictly controlled clean room. And you can see we have measured subjects with age starting from 5 years all the way to 89 years. And a substantial number of our subjects were children and adolescents. We have measured with instruments with overlapping detection range, and the most important one being our inline holographic setup, which enables measurements, direct measurements of size and concentration of particles greater than 6 micrometer. And with our aerosol spectrometers, we could also measure from 10 nanometer all the way to 10 micrometer. We had also other aerosol spectrometers for benchmark and validation. In total, we have collected 5,800 minutes of aerosol spectrometry to obtain our data and analyzed 12,000 holograms. In the experiments, we have relative humidity also under control. So we fully dry all the particles that we have measured. And in order to calculate back the original size the particles had within the respiratory tract before drying for the measurement, we have measured the drying of the airway surface liquid, which is the liquid that you find from on the trachea and on the lung, and also saliva, and with two different techniques. And we found that a factor of 4.5 has to be applied to the dried measurements in order to be able to calculate back the original size of particles. And this is the plot that contains the data that we have collected for the breeding experiments. On the x-axis, you see the particle size in micrometer, starting from 50 nanometer all the way to 1 millimeter. And on the y-axis, you see the concentration. So on this breeding curve, you can see that, and this D0, by the way, is the size of the particles during the production in the respiratory tract. So all this data has been corrected and merged together from all the instruments that we had in the clean room. And the bars also show the standard deviation that we had. And this is the average we obtained from all our subjects. So the first thing you notice is that you initially, for the small particles, this is 1 micrometer, less than 1 micrometer, the concentration is much higher than all the other sizes. And especially for breathing, after about 5 micrometer, you more or less don't observe a lot of particles. But as soon as people start to speak, you see that first, the smaller particles, you have an increased concentration. The shape of the curve is not so far from the shape of the curve you have for breathing, but the most striking difference is that after 5 micrometer, you see an increase in the concentration of very large particles. So these are the particles that we have confirmed that they come from the larynx and pharynx and also the oral cavity. And more importantly, you can see that you have a secondary peak in the concentration of particles during normal speaking. And if people speak louder, you can see that the number of small particles increases. And also in the intermediate regime, we also have increase in the particle concentration, but everything would seem to be collapsing together with the normal speaking. You see more or less the same pattern as you go with the singing and also with the shouting. So in summary, from our data, you can see that particles smaller than 5 micrometer in terms of shape, they behave very similarly together during all the activities. And particles greater than 5 micrometer, you see a very distinct difference between the vocalization activity and breathing. And this actually has huge consequences for calculation of the infection risk, because these large particles can contain thousands of virions and are extremely dangerous for transmitting the airborne diseases. So now that we had this particle size distribution fully under control and gathered from a large number of subjects, we asked ourselves, how would be the risk of infection when an infectious person and a susceptible person come close together in typical daily encounters? So besides the particle size distribution, we have measured the total inward leakage of masks of different types and also fitting as a function of particle size on human subjects. We have considered the shrinkage of the particle from the susceptible in the dry environments that you usually have between the infectious and the susceptible. We have considered size-dependent deposition of the inhaled particles from the susceptible site in the respiratory tract. And at the same time, we have also considered the rehydration of particles that the susceptible is inhaling, because from the dry environment, when you inhale particles, due to the hygroscopic growth in the respiratory tract, these particles actually start to grow. And then with this time-dependent growth in size, you would have a different deposition in the respiratory tract. So that's also we have considered. And we have also considered the concept of upper bound. And upper bound is a rather simple idea. And the fact is that it mainly concerns about the medium or the ambient between the infectious and the susceptible. Since there are so many unknowns, for example, the airflow or the orientation of the people from each other, or the direction of the leakage that you have from the mask, we have said for any unknown properties of transport that we have in the medium between the infectious and the susceptible, we would consider the worst case scenario. And the reasoning is that if with the worst case scenario, we find that the infection risk is low, then in any other real life situation, the infection risk will be even lower than that. So with these in mind, we have considered several scenarios. In one scenario, we considered the case that an infectious is speaking to a susceptible at distance of 1.5 meter. We assumed a turbulent jet. Yes, and we only considered for all these analysis particles up to 50 micrometer in size, and which when they get dry in the ambient, they will become 10 micrometer with the factor of 4.5 that I mentioned. And if you consider only the turbulent jet, we have not considered any deposition of these up to 50 micron particles from this turbulent jet, because we wanted to have an upper bound. We have not considered pathogen inactivation, which also in this short distance is not so conservative anyways. And then just if you calculate the risk of infection for susceptible, this is as a function of time, and this is the risk of infection for this susceptible person. You can see immediately after a few minutes, you are reaching very close to 100%. So this shows that the risk of infection, if both persons are unmasked, is extremely high in close encounters. In the next situation, we had exactly the same distancing as in the previous case. The infectious is still not wearing a mask, but the susceptible is wearing a mask. And the susceptible either is wearing a surgical mask or an FFP2 mask. With a surgical mask, you can see that already after 20 minutes, you you have a risk of infection of about 70%. And with an FFP2 mask that is well fitted to the face, after 60 minutes, you are about 20%. So of course, the risk of infection when you have an FFP2 mask compared to when you don't have anything, or when there is you use the surgical mask, is much better, but still 20%, it's rather high. In the next situation, we have considered a very, very conservative situation, is that we put the two persons with the masks at 0 distance from each other. And then we say, what if all the particles that go through the fabric or through the leakage of the infectious is exposed to the mask of the person without any decrease in the concentration? And then just by considering that, we have considered the case that when they both wear surgical masks or when they both wear the FFP2 mask. And in this very extremely conservative situation, you can see that if both are wearing surgical masks, after 1 hour, you are about 20% of infection risk if they are wearing surgical masks, both of them. But if both of them are wearing a well-fitted FFP2 mask, you are well below 1%. So considering that, we think that this situation is so conservative in estimating risk of infection, that the real risk in the real life situations would be tens or 100 times lower than that. And possibly this is the most widely distributed figure from our paper. In this figure, you see different combinations of the mask and the mean risk of infection that you have from different combinations of the mask. So on any of these faces that you see here, on the left side, you see the mask and the fitting that the infectious is wearing. And on the right side, you see the mask and the fitting that the susceptible is wearing. We considered an FFP2 mask without any fitting. So if you take an FFP2 mask from the package and you put it on your face without doing any adjustment to the nose piece, and that's why we colored it in red. And this is the back fitting on FFP2 mask. We consider the case when you take the FFP2 mask and you try to smooth out the sharp edge on the nose and try to face completely the nose piece to your nose when you put it on. We call this the good fit, and it's the nose piece is colored in green. And then we have also considered the surgical mask that is well fitted with the nose piece. So there are different combinations and different risk of infections. The main message I want you to take from this combination is that when both people are wearing well-fitted FFP2 masks, after 20 minutes of infections speaking at 0 meter distance to the susceptible, the risk of infection would be 1 in 1,000. And the other interesting fact is that if you look at the case when both of the infectious and susceptible are wearing poorly fitted FFP2 masks, the risk of infection is about 4%. But if they use a well-fitted surgical mask, the risk of infection is about 10%. So this shows that a poorly fitted FFP2 mask would still outperform a well-fitted surgical mask. And this was actually the main driver behind the change of recommendation during the Omicron wave. So that the main push was that let's go ahead and use the best mask that we had, and the FFP2 masks become encouraged or mandatory in many different places around the globe. And however, in our conclusion, we always say that since we have considered the 0 meter distance between the subjects, we consider that even this 10% is extremely conservative. So our conclusion was that any type of mask for everybody is the way to go. So universal masking is extremely advised from our side. And of course, if you have access to FFP2 masks, there is no excuse not to use them, because you can clearly see the benefits. And if you spend 30 seconds to adjust the nose piece, you would dramatically decrease the chance of airborne transmission. This is a photo of all the people who were involved in the results that I have presented today. And with this, I would like to thank you all. And if there is any question, I would be happy to answer.
Okay, Mohsen, so thank you very much for this really impressive talk. And so I do have a question about the two questions. One is, well, what do you think about the suggested changes now in policy that as now the infection rates go up again, to get rid of the masks? I mean, you said this indirectly, but maybe we should have this here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why do we want to push for this, because masks are clearly, when you consider the situation when people doesn't have masks and the situations when everybody is wearing even a surgical mask, the difference is so huge, especially in public places. So I personally do not understand why we want to drop this, because in this case, and as I showed you, if only one person is wearing a mask and the infectious is freely walking around without any mask, the risk of infection is not negligible. So I don't understand why they want to do this, and I'm honestly against it. So let's see how it would pan out.
Yeah, okay, so that's I think very clear and very helpful. But there's another article today in the Süddeutsche Zeitung where they somehow have a question mark around the policy to say, well, if you're standing in a restaurant, you should have the mask, but if you're sitting, you can take it off. Because the virus somehow does not know whether you're standing or sitting. What's your take on this? It's clear drinking and eating through a mask is not really possible, but is this something you have considered?
Definitely what you said is right. The virus does not differentiate between if you are standing or sitting, and especially if you are sitting in a restaurant and when people talk, as I showed you, when people start to vocalizing, you would have a lot of these large particles that contains thousands of virions. So, and especially in the wave of Omicron, we know that most of the virions are in these large particles who are sitting in the upper respiratory tract. So these small particles in Omicron seems the early data suggests that would not be as important. So meaning that possibly breathing is rather okay if with respect to the Omicron and when you compare it with Delta, but as soon as you consider speaking and vocalizations, this become extremely dangerous with Omicron as well. So especially in restaurants, as you mentioned, when people start to talk, you would have a lot of these large particles produced during the conversations, and these can contain thousands of virions. And in order, for example, the estimate is that for you to get a infection risk probability of 63%, we need of the order of 100 virions to receive. And one of these particles here could easily contain, just one of them can contain 10 or hundreds of these virions that is enough for infecting you.
Okay, so thank you. Now, before we move to the next talk, well, there is room for one or two other questions. So,
Maybe a heretic question, Martin.
Yeah.
If it is allowed. I mean,
go ahead.
Of course, we agree that reducing infections is of paramount importance if the disease is lethal. Now, with the latest Omicron variants, you know, the lethality of the virus is dwindling really. So question is really, I mean, if there's no vaccination and the disease is not really killing a lot of people, are we doing well in trying just to postpone the infections?
The issue is that there are a lot of unknowns still about the COVID-19. So we have the issue of the long COVID that has to be still understood. Many people would suffer from the long COVID. And it has been shown that even to the people who had asymptomatic situation with the COVID, there are permanent changes in the brain. So, and also the infection, so the fatality and mortality is lower, but it's still not zero. So I think the problem with lifting the mask mandates and asking and trying to get everybody infected is extremely dangerous, and it would limit the people with disabilities or or pre-existing conditions to not be able to freely move around in the society, in the public places, because you can imagine that immediately in a crowded train station, or if you are in a supermarket or in a crowded a shop, if not everyone is wearing masks, you are not safe actually anymore. But when people try to at least keep the masks, we know that the risk of infection is extremely lower. So I think until we understand these, and until at least the wave of Omicron has not declined, I think it's worthwhile to really keep the masking mandate on.
Yeah, okay, no, thank you. Now, Klaus, you had
And
your
if I, Martin, if I may, just to make my question more qualified, wearing a mask is not really much of a burden. I mean, if we're talking about closing kindergarten, is a different scenario, but wearing a mask is really not asking too much, I think.
I fully agree.
Yeah. But we will have a chance to talk about schools and so on in their view in a second, but I had seen Klaus's hand was up.
I just wanted to, pointing in a similar direction. On the one side, I think the results that were presented here are quite clear. Wearing a mask is really not a big burden, and it does makes a big difference. In spite of our Bavarian Prime Minister, who thought 2 years ago this is completely useless, by the way. So on the side, and the other thing is about the restaurant discussion. Of course, those are situations and regulations which are not based only on the evidence coming from a study like here. It's a political decision in the end of the day. What can people accept for their life, to continue in their lives, and to preserve maybe the chances for the restaurants to have a business? So that's not, in a strictly sense, I would agree, we have then to learn how to deliver food through the masks. But that's kind of a challenge.
Yes.
Maybe a different research project on this one.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so before we now move to the next talk, Mohsen, could you please give us show us the last slide again?
The mask combinations?
Oh no, the faces. Yes, yes, because there's an impressive story about this, and I understand why you have not highlighted this. So let me highlight this. Yeah? So the reason why you're here and why we have done lots of projects over the last year was actually a talk of Professor Bodenschatz delivered at the German Physical Society a while ago, early in the pandemic, and I was so impressed by his statements that I also started to change direction, because he said because he has done lots of things in the past in his anti-institute network for many years, and he was not, of course, a COVID-19 researcher, but when he realized that there's a pandemic coming, he decided to, I mean, most correct me if I'm wrong, I just quote from his talk, to switch completely the direction of the research, to focus purely on COVID-19, to use all the instruments, all the equipment, all the network and people to focus on this. And he said he is so grateful and thankful to the Max Planck Society to allow him to do this without a lot of bureaucracy. And that I found very impressive. And so, and we followed lots of his ideas and advice in improving face masks and also developing filters and to find methods how to test objectively, as you've done it for the mask, to test objectively the impact of filters in an environment where it's really important, namely in the school, which is very different from going to a laboratory. And so what he has triggered, and your research group has triggered, and you have given us advice also over the last weeks, well, has now led to a remarkable project where we would say, well, with support from the Max Planck Institute and the TUM and the Silvio Lori Center and Trium and a gymnasium here in Munich, we've been able to actually do experiments about finding the right methodology to evaluate the impact of filters in schools. And so I'm really grateful for giving us this opportunity. And now we should be curious to see what the group has made in the last couple of weeks and months.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, so and thank you again for your brilliant talk and the impact actually you had, as everyone knows, in policy making. And it's clear, we have to say this, this stuff has saved a lot of lives. I mean, you could calculate this actually, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin.